I'm Leo, I'm 32, and 8 years ago my own mother threw me out of her house the moment my golden child half-brother was born, telling me she finally had a real son. Before I tell you about the moment she showed up at my penthouse doorstep begging for help, and turned ghost white when I opened the door, let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The doorbell chimed, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to hang in the air of the marble entryway. It was an unusual interruption on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, sketching out some early concept art for a new character. The only sounds were the scratch of my pencil on the digital pad and the distant, ever-present hum of the metropolis below. I wasn't expecting anyone. My fiancée, the incredible Clara, was at a charity luncheon she had helped organize. My father, Samuel, was likely lost in his own world of ink and imagination in his studio on the far west wing of the apartment. Our shared home was a sanctuary of quiet creativity. Setting my stylus down, I smoothed the front of my shirt and walked across the cool, polished floor. My footsteps were silent. The security panel next to the door showed a live feed of the hallway. I leaned in, and my heart gave a sudden, hard jolt. It was a face I hadn't seen in person in 8 long years. A face that had starred in my nightmares and fueled my ambition. It was my mother, Eleanor. But this wasn't the proud, disdainful woman I remembered. The Eleanor who had cast me out was always impeccably dressed. Her hair sprayed into a perfect helmet, her expression a permanent mask of disapproval. The woman on my security feed looked weathered, defeated. Her hair was limp and uncared for. Her clothes were cheap and worn, and the lines etched into her face spoke not of age, but of a deep, gnawing desperation. A strange, unexpected calm washed over me. The anger I thought would boil up was absent. The panic I might have once felt was gone. In their place was a quiet, settled certainty. This was a moment I hadn't known I was waiting for, but now that it was here, I felt ready. I took a single deep breath, turned the heavy, well-oiled lock, and pulled the massive door open. She gasped, a sharp, choked sound. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted past me, trying to take in the sheer scale of the grand foyer, the sweeping staircase that curved elegantly to the second floor, the immense windows that framed the city skyline like a masterpiece. Her gaze flickered from the original modern art on the walls to my simple but obviously expensive clothes, and finally, it settled back on my face. Confusion, shock, and a raw, ugly envy warred in her expression. "Leo?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She said my name as if it were a foreign word she was struggling to pronounce. I offered her a small, polite smile, the kind of detached smile you give a door-to-door salesperson, not the woman who brought you into the world. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice perfectly even. "It's been a while. Won't you come in?" The moment those words left my mouth, the moment her brain finally connected the dots, that I wasn't a guest here, that this opulent reality was somehow mine, all the color drained from her face. She turned a ghostly, sickly shade of white, her jaw slack. She stumbled a step forward, not like a guest accepting an invitation, but like a ghost drifting into a life it could no longer comprehend. To understand that look, to understand why her presence in my home was an earthquake, we have to go back. Way back. Back to a small, cramped apartment filled with the smell of cheap paint and broken dreams. My childhood smelled like graphite, ink, and paper. My father, Samuel, was a man woven from dreams. In my eyes, he was a magician, capable of conjuring entire worlds with just a pencil. To my mother, Eleanor, he was an anchor, a living embodiment of the life she felt she was too good for. He was an artist, a storyteller, a dreamer. In her vocabulary, those were all just different words for failure. Our small apartment was his studio. Stacks of drawings and canvases leaned against every wall. Sketches of fantastical creatures, noble heroes, and sprawling alien landscapes were tacked over peeling wallpaper. He wasn't just my father, he was my first teacher. He'd sit with me for hours on the floor, our heads bent together over a large sheet of paper, his large, gentle hand guiding my clumsy small one. "See, Leo?" he'd murmur, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Don't just draw the tree. Draw the way the wind feels when it rustles the leaves. Every line tells a story." One time, he was drawing a character he called Star Wanderer, a lonely astronaut searching for a new home. "He's not just floating, buddy," my dad explained. "He's carrying all the memories of his lost planet right here, in his heart." That's how he taught me. Art wasn't just an image. It was a feeling. He was my hero. His kindness was a warm blanket in the cold draft of our home. He saw the world in vibrant color, while my mother saw it only in shades of dollar bills. For her, life wasn't about stories. It was about status symbols. It was about the promotion she felt entitled to, the nicer car the neighbors flaunted, the country club membership that was always out of reach. And every one of those perceived failures was laid squarely at my father's feet. "For God's sake, Samuel, stop filling his head with that artistic nonsense." Her voice would slice through the apartment from the kitchen, sharp and bitter. "Art doesn't pay the salary. It doesn't put food on the table. It's a dead-end hobby for a man who refuses to grow up." My father would never yell back. A part of his spirit would just seem to shrink. He'd sigh, the broad shoulders I saw as so strong slumping just a little. He'd give me a sad, watery smile and whisper, "Don't you listen, son? A dream is the most valuable thing a man can have. We're going to show them all one day." The tension in that apartment was a third person living with us, a suffocating presence. It was in the sharp bang of a cabinet door when the credit card bill arrived. It was in my father's silent retreat into his sketchbook, his pencil moving furiously as if to escape the world around him. I learned to be invisible. I learned that my resemblance to my father was a sin. "You have his eyes," she'd say, her lip curling in a slight sneer. It was never a compliment. It was a diagnosis of a hereditary disease. The dreamer's curse. The final, irreparable break happened when I was 16. The arguments were no longer whispers. They were screams that the neighbors could hear. It wasn't about the divorce yet, but the foundation was crumbling. One evening, she took one of his most detailed drawings, a piece he'd worked on for weeks, and tore it in half. "This is what I think of your work," she screamed. That night, my father packed a single, worn-out suitcase. He knelt in front of me in the dim hallway, his eyes shining with a pain so deep it felt like I was looking into a well. "I have to go, Leo," he said, his voice choked. "I can't create here anymore. I can't breathe. She's tearing up my soul along with the paper." He pressed a thick, new sketchbook into my hands. "Don't you ever let anyone, especially not her, kill the best part of you. Promise me, Leo." I promised, my throat too tight to speak. The next day, she announced the divorce with the same emotion she would use to announce that the trash had been taken out. Relief. Cold, chilling relief. My father left with a broken heart and a portfolio of what she called fantasies. I was left behind in the sterile silence. He tried to stay in touch, sending letters filled with sketches and encouragement, but they suddenly stopped. It would be years before I learned she'd been intercepting them at the mailbox and burning them. His last promise, a whisper through the phone before she changed the number, echoed in my head for years. "I will make it, son. I'll prove her wrong. For both of us." After the divorce, the apartment became a museum of my mother's aspirations. It was quiet, but it was the sterile quiet of an operating room, not the gentle quiet of peace. Eleanor blossomed in this new environment like a toxic flower. She got the promotion she'd always coveted, and immediately used the money to systematically erase every trace of my father. New, soullessly modern furniture replaced our old, comfortable pieces. His art was thrown out, his books donated. It was a brutal, systematic cleansing of a past she was deeply ashamed of. And then Rick entered the picture. She met him at a trendy, overpriced bar where she and her work friends went to feel important. He was the bartender, 14 years her junior, with a smile that was too quick and an air of cocky swagger that my mother mistook for ambition. To me, he just looked like a shark cruising for his next meal. He moved in less than 6 months after they met, filling the void my father left with the scent of cheap cologne and the sound of sports games blaring from the television. He never once called me by my name. I was "Hey you, kid," or most often, just an inconvenient presence to be gestured at. He treated me like a ghost that haunted the property, an annoying remnant of a past life my mother was trying to shed. I learned to navigate the apartment like a spy in enemy territory, sticking to the shadows, making myself as small as possible. My escape plan was college. I worked part-time and saved every penny, applying for every scholarship I could find. My dream was an art degree, a path that was, to my mother, a declaration of war. "Are you determined to end up a broke, pathetic failure just like your father?" She'd scoff whenever she saw me sketching. "You're throwing your life away on that garbage." But the real shift, the moment I went from being an inconvenience to being an outright burden, came with the news of her pregnancy. She was 42 and glowed with a kind of smug triumph that turned my stomach. Rick preened like he'd won the lottery. They paraded their happiness around the apartment, a constant, suffocating performance. This was their real family, their do-over. My half-brother, Evan, was born when I was 24. The timing was a cruel joke. I had just graduated, my art degree proving to be exactly as lucrative as my mother had predicted in a brutal job market. With my savings depleted, I'd been forced to swallow my pride and move back home. From the moment Evan was brought home from the hospital, swaddled in a blue blanket, my status in the house was irrevocably changed. I was no longer a son, not even a ghost. I was the unpaid help. "Leo, his diaper. Now," Eleanor would command, not even bothering to look up from the TV. "Leo, warm his bottle. Can't you see I'm exhausted from doing everything around here?" Rick would say while he sat on the couch watching football. Evan became the sun, and I was a distant, forgotten planet in a cold, outer orbit. The comparisons were a daily form of psychological torture, designed to chip away at what little self-esteem I had left. "Look at his beautiful blue eyes," Eleanor would coo at the baby. "He's going to be a heartbreaker. So handsome, not like." Her eyes would flick to me for a fraction of a second, the unspoken comparison hanging in the air, thick and poisonous. One Christmas, Rick bought Evan a ridiculously expensive electric toy car. He sat on the floor, beaming, as the toddler bumped into furniture. That same day, he handed me a list of chores. "While you're not doing anything useful," he said with a smirk, "you can start by cleaning out the gutters." Evan learned the family hierarchy before he could even form full sentences. He learned that his every whimper was a royal command, and that I was the servant who scurried to obey. He'd give me these strange, unblinking stares, even as a toddler, as if he knew he had won a competition I hadn't even been aware I was in. He was their perfect son, their golden child, and I was just the living, breathing evidence of a life my mother was desperate to forget. The end didn't come with a single explosion, but with a series of small, cruel cuts that finally severed the last thread of my endurance. It happened on my 30th birthday. Not that they knew or cared. To them, it was just a sunny Saturday, a perfect day to take their precious 7-year-old Evan to the Six Flags amusement park. My presence was mandatory. I was the designated bag carrier, photographer, and scapegoat. The car ride was a 90-minute chorus of the wonderful world of Evan. He'd just won the school spelling bee, and to hear my mother and Rick tell it, he was destined for an Ivy League college and a Nobel Prize. "He's got a real mind for success," Rick announced, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "It's in the genes. You either have it or you don't." The implication was as subtle as a punch to the face. "He'll run his own company one day," my mother added, stroking Evan's hair. "He won't be wasting his time with hobbies." At the park, they made a beeline for the Goliath, a hypercoaster that was a monument to terror. My fear of heights is not just a mild discomfort. It's a gut-wrenching, dizzying phobia. My mother knew this. She'd seen me have panic attacks on Ferris wheels as a kid. "Oh, stop being such a baby, Leo," she snapped when I tried to beg off. "You're embarrassing Evan. Look, he's not even scared. Are you, my brave little man?" Of course, Evan was too short to ride. Their solution was simple. I would go alone. "We'll wait right here with the little guy," Rick said, pushing me towards the queue with a grin. "Make sure you scream loud so we can hear you." The humiliation was immense. I stood in line, surrounded by excited couples and laughing groups of friends, a solitary, miserable figure. As the coaster car clicked slowly up the impossibly steep lift hill, I felt a profound and crushing loneliness. I could hear their faint laughter from the ground below, and it felt like they were laughing directly at my terror. But the real breaking point, the moment of no return, happened on the drive home. I'd made the mistake of having a large soda to quell my post-coaster nausea. An hour into the drive, the pressure in my bladder was becoming unbearable. "Can we please pull over at the next exit?" I asked, my voice strained. "I really have to use the restroom." "Hold it," Rick grunted from the driver's seat. "We're almost home. Stop being so dramatic." "I really can't," I pleaded, shifting in my seat, the pain becoming sharp. "It'll just take 5 minutes. For God's sake, Leo, you are a 30-year-old man." My mother twisted around in her seat to hiss at me, her face contorted with annoyance. "You're upsetting Evan with your whining. Can't you be normal for 5 seconds?" I clenched every muscle in my body, trying to will it to obey. My forehead was beaded with sweat. I stared out the window, focusing on the passing trees, praying for a miracle. Then, a deer darted onto the highway. Rick swore loudly and slammed on the brakes. The car screeched, lurching violently forward. In that single, convulsive moment, my body betrayed me. A wave of hot, mortifying liquid flooded my jeans, soaking the seat beneath me. The silence in the car was suddenly absolute, broken only by the sound of the engine idling. Then a sniffle from Rick, a choked snort, and then he erupted in a cruel, braying laugh. My mother joined in, her laughter a high, piercing shriek that drilled into my skull. "Oh my God! I can't believe it!" Rick howled, banging the steering wheel, tears of mirth streaming down his face. "He actually wet himself. The big baby wet his pants. That is disgusting." My mother spat, looking at me with an expression of pure, undiluted contempt. Utterly pathetic. Shame, hot and acidic, rose in my throat, choking me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared out the window at my blurry reflection, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on the glass. That's when she delivered the final, fatal blow. She turned back to face the front, smoothed her skirt, and said to Rick, her voice calm and decided, as if closing a business deal, "You see what I've had to put up with all these years. Thank God I have Evan now. Evan is my only son. I have no other sons." And just like that, something inside me, something that had been bending for 3 decades, finally snapped. The shame didn't disappear, but it was consumed by a clean, cold, diamond-hard rage. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't wait. I flung the door open, ignoring their continued laughter. I walked into the house, leaving a trail of damp footprints, went straight to my room, and pulled my old duffel bag from the back of the closet. I started stuffing my few belongings inside with violent, jerky movements. My mother appeared at the doorway, her arms crossed, a smug look on her face. "And what do you think you're doing?" I zipped the bag and turned to face her. For the first time in my life, I looked her directly in the eye, and I didn't see a mother. I saw a stranger, a cruel stranger. "You said you have no other sons," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'm just correcting the living arrangement to reflect that." I saw a flicker of shock, maybe even fear, in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual hardened sneer. "Fine, go. Let's see how long you last in the real world. Don't come crawling back here when you fail." "Don't worry," I said, walking past her without a backward glance. "You've already seen the last of me." I walked out that door and into the fading light, and I never, ever looked back. The feeling of closing that front door behind me was a strange cocktail of terror and exhilarating freedom. The world suddenly felt huge and impossibly indifferent. I had about $400 to my name, a duffel bag of clothes still smelling faintly of that horrible house, and nowhere to go. My first night as a free man was spent at a grimy motel off the interstate, where the television was bolted to the dresser and the bedsheets felt like sandpaper. The next day, driven by desperation, I found the cheapest apartment listed online. It was a tiny studio in a crumbling brick building that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp. The single window looked out onto a graffiti-covered brick wall. The faucet dripped a steady, maddening rhythm, and I could hear my neighbors' arguments as if they were in the room with me. But it was mine. It was my fortress of solitude, my kingdom of one. Finding a job was a brutal lesson in humility. My art degree, as my mother had so gleefully predicted, was all but useless for securing a stable income. After dozens of rejections, I finally landed a mind-numbing data entry job at a massive, faceless corporation. The pay was abysmal, barely covering my rent and a diet that consisted mostly of instant ramen and cheap coffee. The office was a sea of gray cubicles under the relentless hum of fluorescent lights. It was a soul-crushing existence, but it was an existence I was building myself. Every dollar, earned through hours of staring at spreadsheets, was my own. In this gray landscape, I encountered Mark. He was the kind of office predator that thrives in corporate environments. Slick, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. He saw my quiet demeanor and my cheap, slightly too large clothes and marked me as an easy target. He'd accidentally forget to invite me to team lunches, make passive-aggressive comments about my work during meetings, and take credit for small tasks I had completed. For a few months, I just took it. It was a familiar dynamic. I was conditioned to be the punching bag. But the new me, the one forged in the fire of that final car ride, was growing stronger. The breaking point came when he presented a workflow improvement I had designed as his own idea, earning him praise from our manager. The old Leo would have seethed in silence. The new Leo waited. At 5 o'clock, as he was packing up his briefcase, I walked over to his cubicle. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke in a low, even tone that was far more menacing than shouting. "Mark," I said, leaning against the cubicle wall. "That was a good idea you presented today. A really good idea." He looked up, a smug smile on his face. "Thanks, man. Just came to me." "Funny?" I said, my voice dropping even lower. "Because it's the exact same idea I emailed to you for feedback last Tuesday. I still have the time-stamped email. I also have the preliminary drafts I saved on the server." I paused, letting the information sink in. "If you ever, and I mean ever, pull a stunt like that again, I will forward that email chain to our manager, his manager, and HR. I will make sure everyone in this building knows you're a fraud. Are we clear?" The smug look on his face melted away, replaced by a pasty, wide-eyed panic. He just nodded, unable to speak. That small victory felt like winning a war. It was the first time I had stood up for myself without hesitation, and it was empowering. A few weeks later, a call came from an unknown number. It was my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, the family's designated peacekeeper and gossipmonger. "Leo, honey, your mother is just beside herself with worry," she cooed. "Is she?" I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "Of course. She loves you. You know she says things she doesn't mean when she's stressed. You should call her. Clear the air. Tell her I've never breathed clearer air in my life," I said, and before she could respond, I hung up and blocked the number. I was building a new life, brick by painful brick, and there were no doors in it that led back to them. For 2 years, my world was small and meticulously controlled. It consisted of my cubicle, my tiny apartment, and the grocery store. I wasn't miserable, but I was profoundly lonely. I had amputated the gangrenous limb of my family, but the phantom pains remained. The walls I had built to protect myself had also become my prison. I had survived, but I wasn't truly living. The change came unexpectedly, at a mandatory corporate networking event my company hosted. It was my idea of a personal hell. A hotel ballroom filled with people in ill-fitting suits, all talking too loudly and laughing too hard. I was hiding in a corner, nursing a lukewarm beer and plotting my escape, when a woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a smile that seemed genuine approached me. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else but here, she said, her voice amused. I couldn't help but smile back. I'm just trying to blend in with the potted plants. They seemed to be having a better time. Her name was Clara. She worked in marketing for a different company and despised these events as much as I did. We ended up talking in that corner for over an hour, creating our own little island in the sea of forced pleasantries. We discovered a shared love for old sci-fi movies, a mutual hatred for cilantro, and a deep appreciation for the quiet magic of used bookstores. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't performing. I wasn't being the quiet son, the diligent employee, the invisible man. I was just me, and she seemed to like that person. We started dating. Our first date was at a small, cluttered bookstore, followed by coffee. Our second was a walk in the park. It was easy. It was comfortable. With her, the world seemed to lose its sharp, threatening edges. But a shadow loomed over us, my past. I kept it locked away in a dark room in my mind, terrified of what she would think if I ever opened the door. Who would want someone with a history like mine? Someone whose own mother had thrown him out like garbage? The conversation I was dreading came one rainy evening, about 3 months into our relationship. We were sitting in her car outside my apartment building, the sound of the rain drumming on the roof a gentle rhythm. She turned to me, her expression soft but serious. Leo, she said, her voice gentle. I feel like I know you, but I also feel like there's this huge part of your life, a whole chunk of your story, that's off limits. I'm not prying, but I want you to know you can trust me. My heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. This was it. The moment she would see the real, damaged me and run for the hills. My hands were trembling. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I unlocked the door to that dark room and let it all pour out. I told her everything. About my father's dreams and my mother's bitterness. About Rick's casual cruelty and the suffocating pedestal they built for Evan. I told her about the amusement park, the roller coaster, and the final, soul-crushing humiliation in the car. I laid out all the ugly, broken pieces of myself, fully expecting to see revulsion in her eyes. When I finished, the car was silent except for the rain. I couldn't look at her. I just stared at my hands, twisted in my lap, waiting for the verdict. Then, I felt her warm hand cover mine. I looked up. There were tears streaming down her face, but her expression wasn't one of pity. It was one of righteous, blazing anger. Those people, she said, her voice shaking with a fury that stunned me. They are not your family, Leo. They are monsters. What they did to you, that's not just bad parenting. That is unforgivable abuse. She didn't see me as broken. She saw me as a survivor. She wasn't disgusted by my past. She was enraged on my behalf. In that moment, her anger washed away so much of my shame. It validated all the pain I had kept hidden for so long. She pulled me into a fierce hug, and I let myself collapse against her. The tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry for years finally breaking free. For the first time since my father had walked out the door all those years ago, I didn't feel alone. Clara became my anchor in a stormy sea. With her by my side, I slowly, carefully began to heal. I started drawing again, my sketchbook filling with the images I had suppressed for years. She made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of love. Life with Clara was like stepping out of a black and white film into a world of vibrant color. We moved in together, leaving my sad little studio behind for a bright, airy one-bedroom apartment that we filled with plants and books. I quit the soul-sucking data entry job and, with Clara's encouragement, landed a position as a junior graphic designer at a small but creative ad agency. The salary was only marginally better, but the work was fulfilling. I was finally getting paid for my ideas, for my art. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. The past had receded, becoming a scar that was still visible but no longer ached. I hadn't had any contact with my mother or her new family in nearly 6 years, and the silence was a blessing. I had Clara, I had a job I didn't hate, and I had my art. It was enough. Then, one gray November afternoon, a letter arrived that threatened to shatter my carefully constructed peace. It was a plain white envelope, addressed to me in a familiar, messy, all-caps script that made my heart simultaneously leap and plummet. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. It was my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife. Inside was not the long, explanatory letter I might have expected, not an apology for years of silence. It was a single sheet of paper containing a hand-drawn map to a place called the Silver Diner, in a small, forgotten town 3 hours away. Below the map were only 7 words. I never stopped believing in you, son. A storm of conflicting emotions crashed over me. Hope, fragile and tentative. Anger, hot and sharp, at the years of silence. And a deep, aching curiosity. Why now? What did this cryptic message mean? What is it, Leo? Clara asked, coming up behind me and wrapping her arms around my waist. She had seen the look on my face. I handed her the letter. She read it, her brow furrowed. That's cryptic, she said. What are you going to do? I don't know, I confessed, the letter trembling in my hand. Part of me is furious. He just disappeared. He let me think he was gone. But another part of me, I have to know, Clara. I have to know why. Then you should go, she said, her support unwavering as always. You don't have to forgive him. You don't even have to talk to him. But you've spent your whole life with a story that's missing its final chapters. Maybe this is your chance to find them. The following Saturday, I made the 3-hour drive alone. The town was even smaller and more run down than I had imagined. I found the Silver Diner, a classic greasy spoon with a flickering neon sign and cracked vinyl booths. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I couldn't bring myself to go in. Instead, I parked across the street, my car a makeshift surveillance van, and I waited. An hour later, I saw him. He emerged from a dilapidated apartment building next door, and my breath hitched in my chest. It was him, but it was a version of him that looked like he'd been eroded by time and hardship. His hair was almost completely gray. His clothes were worn and ill-fitting, and he walked with the stooped, shuffling gait of a man who had lost his fight. He went into the diner, sat at the counter, and nursed a single cup of coffee, staring into its black depths as if looking for answers. All the anger I felt drained away, replaced by a wave of profound, crushing sadness. My mother had won. Her prediction had come true. He was a failure. His dreams had crumbled into this, a lonely existence in a town that time forgot. He hadn't sent the letter from a place of triumph, but from a place of desperation. The pain of that realization was too much to bear. It confirmed every cruel word she had ever said about him, and by extension, about me. I couldn't face him. I couldn't face the death of that last, lingering piece of childhood hope. I quietly started the car and drove the 3 hours back home, the letter on the passenger seat no longer a mystery, but an epitaph for a dream. I told Clara what I had seen, and she just held me, letting me mourn the hero I thought I had lost all over again. Several months slipped by. The sad image of my father in the diner was filed away, another painful memory in a life full of them. Clara and I moved forward. We were saving up for a down payment on a small house, talking about wedding venues, and building a future that was blissfully, beautifully ordinary. And then, just as I was starting to believe the past was truly in the past, it came roaring back. It started with a text message on a Sunday evening, as Clara and I were curled up on the couch watching a movie. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. Leo, it's your mother. I need to see you. It's a dire emergency. A block of ice formed in my stomach. I showed the screen to Clara. Her face immediately hardened. Delete it, she said, her voice sharp with a protective fire I adored. You owe that woman nothing. Not a single word. I know, I said, but a dark, morbid curiosity took hold. After nearly 8 years of absolute silence, what could possibly constitute a dire emergency? Before I could even formulate a reply, before I could follow Clara's very good advice, my apartment buzzer shrieked through the quiet room. We looked at each other, a shared sense of dread passing between us. I went to the intercom, my hand hesitating over the talk button. Yes, Leo, it's me. Please let me up. I'm begging you. It was Eleanor's voice, but it was thin and reedy, stripped of its usual commanding tone. Don't do it, Clara whispered, standing beside me. But the morbid curiosity won out. I needed to see this. I pressed the button to unlock the main door. A few moments later, there was a frantic knocking at our apartment door. I opened it, and the woman who practically fell into the room was the same desperate, broken creature I would later see on my penthouse doorstep. She was a ghost of her former self. She threw her arms around me in a cloying, theatrical hug, her body trembling with manufactured sobs. Oh, Leo, my son, my beautiful boy. I'm so sorry. I have been a terrible, terrible mother. I stood perfectly still, my arms at my sides, refusing to participate in the performance. This felt profoundly wrong. It was too much, too sudden. She pulled back, dabbing at her dry eyes with the back of her hand. I was wrong, Leo. So wrong about everything. I miss you every single day. I just want my son back. Please, can you ever find it in your heart to forgive me? Clara stepped forward, positioning herself between us. Her arms were crossed, her expression unyielding. What do you really want, Eleanor? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. My mother's eyes flickered to Clara, and for a split second, the old, venomous Eleanor peeked through the mask of sorrow. This is a private family matter, she snapped. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back in place as she turned to me. It's Rick, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He's in terrible trouble, Leo. He's been arrested. And there it was. The real reason. The emergency. Arrested for what? I asked, my voice flat, betraying no emotion. Oh, some silly business misunderstanding, she said, waving a dismissive hand. They're calling it fraud. It's all lies, of course. He's a good man, Leo. A wonderful stepfather to you. I must have given her a look that could curdle milk because she quickly changed tack. They've set his bail. And it's a very large amount of money. A ridiculous amount. We don't have it. I sold my jewelry, but it's not enough. I didn't know who else to turn to in our moment of crisis. I just stared at her, a silent, hollow laugh building in my chest. After 8 years, after everything, she hadn't come to atone. She had come to make a withdrawal. She had the unmitigated gall to show up at my door asking for money to bail out the worthless man who had helped her destroy my childhood. The nerve of it was almost breathtaking. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room with the force of a gunshot. Her performance stopped. The fake tears vanished. Her face hardened, the mask of the grieving mother melting away to reveal the cold, hard, calculating woman I knew so well. What did you just say to me? She hissed. I said no, I repeated, my voice stronger this time, colder. This is the family you chose, mother. This is your mess. You clean it up. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The desperate, pleading mother was gone, replaced by a snarling harpy. Her face, moments before a mask of sorrow, was now twisted into a familiar sneer of rage. How dare you? She shrieked, her voice climbing an octave. After everything I've done for you, I put a roof over your head. I fed you. I clothed you. And this is the thanks I get? You ungrateful little parasite. You abandon your family the moment things get tough. My family? I shot back, my own voice rising to meet hers. Years of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. You have the audacity to talk to me about family? You stopped being my mother in the back of that car. You told me, and I quote, Evan is my only son. You made your choice, Eleanor. So go ask your only son for help. Let's see what your precious golden child can do for you now. Her face went from red to a blotchy, pale white. She was cornered, and like a trapped rat, she did the only thing she knew how. She bit down hard, trying to inflict as much pain as possible. He can't help, she screamed, her words a frantic, spittle-flecked torrent. You think this is easy for me? That idiot Rick. He had to go and get himself arrested right after he found out. He was going to ruin everything. He was going to leave us with nothing. Found out what? Clara asked, stepping forward, her curiosity piqued by my mother's hysterical rant. Eleanor laughed, a harsh, grating sound completely devoid of humor. Found out that Evan isn't even his son. That's what? She spat the words out like poison. The precious boy he doted on isn't his. Rick found some old letters I'd hidden, letters from his real father, right before the cops raided the house. He was going to use them in the divorce, take everything. He was going to destroy me. The room plunged into a deafening silence. Clara and I just stared at her, utterly stunned. Evan, the golden child, the real son, the entire justification for my exile. He wasn't even Rick's son. The perfect family she had built, the one she had sacrificed me for, was a complete and utter fraud. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She had left my father, a good and honest man, and then cheated on the younger man she had replaced him with. Her perfect family was built on a foundation of lies, secrets, and betrayal. Eleanor seemed to realize the magnitude of what she had just admitted in her rage. Her eyes widened in panic, her hand flying to her mouth. But it was too late. The truth was out. A toxic spill in the middle of our living room. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me, trying desperately to regain the upper hand. This doesn't change anything, she snarled, her voice a low hiss. You still owe us. You hear me, Leo? You owe us for the life we gave you. And if you don't help, I swear to God I will make your life a living hell. With that final, impotent threat, she yanked the door open and stormed out, slamming it so hard that a picture frame on the wall rattled. Clara and I were left in the ringing silence. She turned to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. Did all of that really just happen? I nodded slowly, a strange, bitter sense of vindication settling over me. All my life I'd been made to feel like I was the problem, the broken piece that didn't fit. But it was never me. It was them. The entire structure was rotten from the core. And for the first time, I felt the chains of my past truly fall away. A week after my mother's chaotic visit, my world tilted on its axis. A call came from a number I didn't recognize. A man with a calm, professional voice introducing himself as the lawyer for my father, Samuel Miller. The conversation was brief, surreal, and it fundamentally rewrote the last decade of my life. It ended with an address and a keycard being messengered to my apartment, which is how I found myself standing in the foyer of a penthouse that seemed to occupy the entire top floor of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. My father, the man I'd seen looking broken and defeated, was not a failure. He was S. Miller, the enigmatic and wildly successful creator of the Golden Child comic book universe, a cultural juggernaut that had spawned blockbuster movies, a hit TV series, and a billion-dollar merchandising empire. He had used a pen name and a carefully constructed wall of privacy to shield himself from the world. His visit to that rundown diner had been a rare, disguised trip to his old hometown to settle some final affairs before reaching out to me. He hadn't been desperate. He had been preparing. The penthouse, his lawyer explained, was his primary residence, and he wanted me to join him, to work with him, to be his son again. My head was still reeling from the shock when the building's head of security buzzed the apartment's intercom. Mr. Miller? Apologies for the intrusion, sir. There are 3 individuals in the lobby causing a significant disturbance. A Ms. Eleanor, a Mr. Rick, and a young man. They're demanding to see a Leo Miller and refusing to leave. My father, who had been showing me his incredible studio, looked at me. His expression was calm, his eyes steady. It seems your past has arrived, son. The question is, are you ready to finally face it? I took a deep breath, feeling a surprising sense of resolve. Let them up. When the private elevator doors slid open, the 3 of them spilled out like a toxic cloud. Rick, who had somehow scraped together the money for bail, looked like he was ready to start swinging. Evan, now a lanky preteen with a spoiled, sullen look on his face, trailed behind them, staring at his phone. And my mother, Eleanor, led the charge, her face a mask of righteous fury. They stopped dead about 10 feet into the foyer. Their angry momentum vanished, replaced by slack-jawed awe. Their eyes darted everywhere, trying to process the sheer scale and opulence of the space. The double-height ceilings, the priceless art, the panoramic city views. It was the same shock I had seen on my mother's face before, but magnified and reflected in the greedy eyes of Rick. "What is this?" she finally managed to gasp, her voice a strangled whisper. "Where did you get the money for this, Leo? Did you win the lottery? Who are you working for? You've been holding out on us, you little snake." Rick snarled, finding his voice and taking a menacing step forward. "We did some digging, found your new address after you registered to vote. Living in a palace like this while your own mother is suffering? You're going to write us a check, right now? You're going to pay for my legal fees and for all the pain you've caused." "Yeah," Evan chimed in, finally looking up from his phone, his voice a carbon copy of his mother's entitled whine. "Mom said you owe us. You have to take care of your family." They were so wrapped up in their own delusional narrative, so blinded by their greed, that they didn't notice the tall figure emerging from the hallway that led to the studio. I just stood there, a strange sense of calm enveloping me. I let them spew their venom. I wanted them to put all their ugliness on display, to show their true colors in the bright, unforgiving light of this room. "I'm not giving you a single dollar," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of my newfound position. Rick's face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. "You ungrateful little punk. You think you can. I think you're in my home." A new voice cut in, deep and resonant with an authority that stopped Rick in his tracks. "And I would appreciate it if you didn't speak to my son in that tone." The three of them whipped around. My father, Samuel Miller, stepped into the light. He wasn't the shabby, defeated man from my memory. He was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black suit. His graying hair was styled, and his presence was utterly commanding. He looked every inch the creative genius and business magnate that he was. Rick's jaw dropped. As a fan of the movies, he recognized the face from a rare TV interview he'd seen once. You're S. Miller," he stammered, his bravado vanishing in a puff of smoke. My mother just stared, her mind a tangled mess of confusion, unable to connect the man she had discarded as a failure with the famous figure standing before her. "Samuel? What are you doing here? Are you his butler?" My father let out a short, sharp, humorless laugh that echoed in the cavernous room. "No, Eleanor, I am not his butler." He closed the distance between us and placed a firm, proud hand on my shoulder. "He works with me, and this isn't his home." He paused, letting her tiny flicker of hope ignite before he crushed it completely. "It's my home, and my son is welcome in it for the rest of his life." The silence that followed my father's words was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. Eleanor's face was a tragic slideshow of emotions, from bafflement to dawning horror, and finally to a sick, pale disbelief. She looked as if the marble floor had just dissolved beneath her feet. Rick stood frozen, his mind visibly struggling to process a reality that was completely outside his understanding. Evan, for the first time, looked up from his phone with genuine confusion. "But you were a failure," my mother finally stammered, the words a weak, pathetic whisper. "The drawings, the debt, you had nothing." My father looked at her, not with anger, but with a kind of weary pity. "You thought my dreams were worthless, didn't you, Eleanor? You saw a sketchbook and saw a bill you couldn't pay. You saw passion and called it a pathetic hobby. You only ever saw the world through the lens of what you lacked." He gestured expansively at the magnificent room around them. "Let me show you what those worthless dreams built. They built this penthouse. They built a publishing house. They built 2 movie studios that are currently in a bidding war for the next film rights. And you know what the crown jewel of that empire is? The story that started it all." He let the question hang in the air, a cruel, dangling hook. He looked directly into her eyes and delivered the final, devastating truth. "It's a comic book series called The Golden Child. It's about a deeply narcissistic, materialistic mother who despises her artist husband's dreams. In her greed, she casts aside her sensitive, talented son in favor of a new, spoiled brat who she believes is the key to her happiness. He took a step closer to her. Does any of that sound familiar, Eleanor? The blood didn't just drain from her face. It seemed to vanish from her entire body. She swayed on her feet, looking like she might faint. The comic, the movies, the merchandise she had undoubtedly seen everywhere for years. It was all about her. She was the villain in the blockbuster story of the husband she had thrown away, and she had been completely oblivious. My father's hand squeezed my shoulder. And Leo, he continued, his voice ringing with pride, is not just my son. He is my creative partner. He is the lead character designer for the entire new animated series. And, for the record, he is the sole beneficiary of my entire estate. The inheritance will be his, and his alone. Your custody of him ended the day you threw him out, but my role as his father never did. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who had caused me so much pain, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone, burned away by the truth. All that was left was a vast, empty space. You came to my apartment a week ago, I said, my voice clear and steady, and you played the part of a grieving mother. But it was a lie. You didn't want forgiveness, you wanted a loan. You came here today demanding that I support you, that I take responsibility for you. But you never took responsibility for me. You called me a parasite, a failure, a mistake. I glanced at the stunned faces of Rick and Evan. You threw me away for this. For a con man and a lie. You built your perfect little family on a foundation of deceit, and now it has all come crashing down. You have nothing because you are nothing, mother. Nothing but a hollow, greedy shell. Rick, snapping out of his stupor and realizing his last chance at a payday was standing right in front of him, made a final, desperate move. This is insane, he roared, lunging not at me, but at my father. We're not leaving without. He never finished the sentence. It was the last and stupidest mistake of his life. This is the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You guys are amazing. If you could do me a huge favor and hit that like button and comment the number 1 down below, it lets me know you made it this far with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It tells me that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Rick's desperate lunge was clumsy and slow. But before my father or I could even react, the main door to the penthouse, which had been left slightly ajar, swung open with force. Clara stood in the doorway, her expression as cold and hard as the marble floor. She was not alone. Flanking her were 2 imposing men in dark, impeccably tailored suits. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes missed nothing. They radiated an aura of professional, quiet menace. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Rick, Clara said. Her voice, usually so warm and full of life, was like a shard of ice. It cut through the room and stopped Rick dead in his tracks, his hands still raised in a half-formed grab. He stared at her, then at the 2 men, his bravado instantly evaporating. Who the hell are you? He demanded, though his voice now held a tremor of fear. I'm Leo's fiancée, Clara said simply, taking a deliberate step into the room. Then she played the card that ended the game. And my father is Daniel Prescott, the lead prosecutor for the district attorney's office. These 2 gentlemen, she gestured calmly to the men beside her, are part of his security detail. They were kind enough to escort me up when I heard there was a disturbance. Now, assault, extortion, harassment of a minor for financial gain. Those are all very serious felonies, especially for a man who is currently out on bail for federal fraud charges. The name Daniel Prescott was a bomb that detonated in the room. He was a notoriously tough, high-profile prosecutor, famous in the city for his zero-tolerance policy on white-collar crime. The mention of his name, a lawyer of his stature, in this context was a death sentence for any hope Rick had left. The color drained from his face. The cornered animal rage was replaced by the pure, primal fear of a man who knew he was trapped. He slowly lowered his hands and took a step back, his eyes darting towards the elevator like a spooked horse. Eleanor stared at Clara, her mind reeling. She looked at me, at the confident, successful man I had become. She looked at Clara, my powerful, protective fiancé. She looked at Samuel, the failure who now held all the cards. The full, crushing weight of her defeat finally seemed to land on her. She had lost on every front, in every conceivable way. She had no power here, no leverage. She had bet everything on the wrong life, and now her losses were absolute. One of the security guards stepped forward, his gaze fixed on my father, completely dismissing the others as irrelevant. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Miller?" he asked, his voice a low, respectful baritone. "No problem at all, gentlemen," my father replied, his voice calm and commanding. "These people were just on their way out." He then turned his steely gaze on the three of them. "Get out of my home, now." There were no more arguments, no more threats, no more demands. Defeated and broken, they turned and shuffled towards the door. Rick refused to make eye contact with anyone. Evan, finally looking scared, clutched his mother's arm. But Eleanor, she paused at the threshold and looked back at me one last time. The anger was gone. The hatred was gone. All that remained in her eyes was a vast, hollow emptiness. It was the look of a woman staring into the abyss of her own making, a life filled with nothing but ruin and regret. Clara walked to my side as the two security men silently escorted my former family into the elevator, their presence ensuring there would be no final, parting shots. She slipped her hand into mine, her grip firm, grounding me in the surreal moment. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her eyes searching mine. I looked from her beautiful, strong face to my father, who had come to stand on my other side, placing a comforting hand on my back. The two people who formed the foundation of my new life, my real family, were standing with me as the door finally, definitively closed on the darkest chapter of my existence. "I am now," I said, and the truth of those words resonated deep in my soul. A weight I had carried for so long, a burden I hadn't even fully realized was still there, had finally been lifted. The ghosts had been confronted. They had been exposed in the light, and they had vanished. The heavy wooden door of the penthouse clicked shut, and the silence that descended was not empty or awkward. It was a silence filled with peace. It was the sound of sanctuary. My father turned to me, and I was shocked to see his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. He didn't speak. He just pulled me into a hug. It wasn't the tentative embrace of two men reconnecting after a long absence. It was the fierce, powerful hug of a father who had been waiting a decade to hold his son and tell him he was safe. It was a hug that conveyed everything words could not. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there, and I am so incredibly proud of the man you've become, and you're home now, you're finally home." I hugged him back just as fiercely, burying my face in his shoulder, the scent of his familiar aftershave a memory from a life I thought was gone forever. In that moment, all the lingering anger I had held for his years of silence dissolved. I understood now. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been fighting a war alone to build a fortress strong enough to protect us. He had to become successful enough that my mother couldn't touch him or use me to get to his money. He had been building this life not just for himself, but for me. He had finally returned to bring me inside the walls. When we finally pulled apart, Clara was smiling, though her own tears were tracing paths down her cheeks. "Well," she said, her voice thick with emotion but still managing a touch of lightness, "I think this situation calls for the most expensive bottle of champagne you have, Mr. Miller." My father let out a deep, booming laugh, a sound of pure relief and joy that filled the grand room with warmth. "I think you're absolutely right." He looked from me to Clara, his smile wide and genuine. "Welcome to the family, Clara. The real family." That night, the three of us sat on the expansive balcony, the city lights a galaxy at our feet. We didn't talk about the ugly scene from earlier. We talked about the future. We talked about my father's ideas for a new comic, about Clara's ambitious plans for her career, about our wedding. We talked and we laughed, and for the first time in my 32 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The door to my past hadn't just closed. It had been sealed, and a new one, flooding my life with light, had been thrown wide open. 1 year later, the air in the sun-drenched garden was filled with the scent of roses and the sound of soft string music. I stood under a large oak tree, adjusting the knot of my tie for the 10th time. I looked out at the small gathering of guests. Our closest friends, Clara's wonderful family, my father's trusted colleagues, and a wave of profound gratitude washed over me. My father was standing near the front row, chatting easily with Clara's parents. He was laughing, a deep, genuine sound that reached me across the lawn. He looked 10 years younger, the weight of his solitary mission finally lifted. Beside him stood his lovely wife, Amelia, a warm-hearted art historian he had met a few years prior. She had welcomed me into their life with an open heart, treating me not as a stepson, but as a son. Their 2 young children, my half-brother and sister, were the designated ring-bearer and flower girl, currently more interested in chasing a butterfly near the bushes. This was my family now, a little chaotic, wonderfully loving, and blessedly normal. My life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My work with my father had evolved from an apprenticeship into a true creative partnership. He had officially given me the title of head of character design for his entire media universe, a significant promotion that came with a salary that still shocked me. But more than the money, it was the trust. He trusted me with his legacy. My designs for the new animated series, a project I was heading, had been met with huge enthusiasm from the studio. I had found my purpose, a perfect synthesis of the artistic passion I inherited from him and the quiet resilience I had forged in my years alone. Clara had been my rock through it all. She had helped me navigate the dizzying changes, from learning how to manage wealth to dealing with the occasional nosy reporter. She kept me grounded, reminding me that my worth wasn't in my father's name or my new bank account, but in the person I had always been. The music shifted, and a hush fell over the garden. Everyone turned, and there she was, Clara, walking down the grassy aisle on her father's arm, looking so beautiful it literally took my breath away. Her eyes met mine, and she broke into a smile that radiated pure love and joy, a smile that felt like coming home. As she joined me under the oak tree and placed her hand in mine, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that all the pain and loneliness of my past had been worth it, because it had all led me to this single perfect moment. Later that evening, at the reception, my father pulled me aside from the dancing and celebration. He was holding a small, flat, rectangular gift, wrapped in simple brown paper. "I found this when I was finally clearing out my last storage unit," he said, his voice a little thick. "It's from the old days. I wanted you to have it now." I carefully unwrapped it. It was a simple, cheap picture frame. Inside was an old, slightly yellowed sketch. It was a drawing of a little boy, no older than 7 or 8, with a wild mop of dark hair and my serious, focused eyes. The boy was sitting at a kitchen table, his head bent in intense concentration over his own drawing. In my father's familiar, messy script, written in the bottom corner, were 4 words, "My proudest achievement." Tears pricked my eyes as I stared at the image of the little boy I used to be. I looked up at my father, who was watching me, his own eyes glistening. "I never gave up on you, Leo," he said softly. "Not for a second. I just had to build a world that was safe enough and strong enough to finally bring you into." I hugged him, the old framed sketch pressed between us, a tangible link to a love that had survived years of distance, silence, and misunderstanding. It was the final, healing piece of my shattered past, made whole again. In the year that followed our wedding, news about my former family would occasionally find its way to us, like debris washing ashore after a storm. We never went looking for it, but the world is a small place and stories travel. Rick's day in court was a public affair. His fraudulent activities were more extensive and damaging than anyone had realized. He had scammed dozens of people, many of them elderly, out of their life savings. With the high-profile nature of the case, amplified by his connection to the S. Miller story that had been whispered about in the tabloids, the prosecution, under the watchful eye of Clara's father's office, showed no mercy. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in a federal prison without the possibility of parole. His life of cheap tricks and easy money was over. Eleanor was left adrift in the wreckage. Rick's few remaining assets were seized by the government to pay restitution to his victims, and she was saddled with a mountain of his personal debt. The bank foreclosed on their house. A former neighbor of ours, who I'd reconnected with on social media, sent me a message one day. She had seen Eleanor working as a hostess at a dingy chain restaurant out by the interstate. She said my mother looked old, bitter, and angry at the world. Eleanor had built her life on a foundation of status and money, and when those things were stripped away, there was nothing left. She had made her choices, and now she was living in the barren world she had created for herself. Evan's story was perhaps the most tragic. He was a product of his toxic environment, a boy raised on a throne of lies. Without the money and the constant adoration, he was lost. He ended up living with my Aunt Carol, who had her own family and treated him like a burden. The last I heard, he was struggling at a local community college, an angry, resentful young man with no direction. He had been the golden child, but the gold was just cheap plating, and now it had all flaked away, revealing the ordinary, lost kid underneath. The final piece of the puzzle came to me one evening while I was doing research online for a new project. I was looking into genetic research for a sci-fi character's backstory and stumbled across an article profiling a brilliant young scientist who had just received a major grant for his work. The name on the article rang a distant bell. I did an image search, and a picture of the scientist appeared on my screen. My blood ran cold. It was a man my mother had dated for a few months right after she left my father, long before Rick came along. Back then, he had been a penniless university student, working nights as a bartender to pay his way through his PhD program, at the very same bar where my mother would later meet Rick. And looking at the scientist's photo, the shape of his eyes, the structure of his jaw, I saw the unmistakable ghost of Evan's features. The irony was so profound it was almost poetic. The brilliant but broke student my mother had discarded as not having enough ambition was Evan's biological father. He had gone on to become a leader in his field, likely completely unaware that he even had a son. My mother had thrown away a life with a quiet genius for a life with a flashy con man. It was the ultimate testament to her flawed, materialistic judgment. I closed the laptop, a final quiet sense of closure settling over me. Their story, a tragedy of their own making, was finally and completely over. My own was just getting started. Tonight, Clara and I are standing together on the wide, glass-walled balcony of the penthouse. The city sprawls beneath us, a glittering, living carpet of light and energy. It's a clear, cool night, and the sky is a deep indigo, a perfect backdrop for the endless river of headlights and the bright rectangles of a million windows, each containing a million different stories. Clara leans her head against my shoulder, and I wrap my arm around her waist, pulling her close. The warmth of her body against mine is a comforting, solid presence. We stand in an easy, companionable silence for a long time, just watching the world breathe below us. "A penny for your thoughts," she says softly, her voice barely a whisper against the gentle breeze. I take a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. "I was thinking about family," I say, my voice quiet. "For most of my life, I thought it was something you were born into, a hand you were dealt for better or for worse, something permanent, like a brand." My mind briefly flashes to an image of Eleanor's face, twisted with rage in this very room. I think of Rick's empty bravado and Evan's confused sense of entitlement. That was the family I was born into, a cage built of bitterness, resentment, and conditional love. But I was wrong. I continue, looking down at Clara's hand, now intertwined with mine. It's not about blood. It's not about obligation. It's about choice. It's about who you choose to let into your heart, who you choose to fight for, and most importantly, who chooses to fight for you. My thoughts drift to my father, his quiet, unwavering belief in me, a steady flame that burned even across years of silence. I think of Amelia and my new siblings, who accepted me with an easy, uncomplicated affection. And I look at Clara, the woman who found me when I was a ghost and saw a man worth loving. The woman who became my fiercest defender. This is my family. The one I chose. The one I built. The one that chose and built me right back. The view from up here is extraordinary. But it's not the altitude or the luxury that makes my heart swell. It's the journey it took to get here. The climb out of that dark, suffocating past was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it made me appreciate the light, the air, the sheer, breathtaking expanse of the view that much more. The scars are still there, but they no longer hurt. They are just a map of where I've been. And looking out at the future, stretching before me as limitlessly as the city skyline, I know with absolute certainty that the best part of the journey is just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had a moment in your life that completely changed its direction? I'd be honored to hear about it. Please feel free to share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what I have to share next.